Amid the thick, freezing ocean of the Middle Ages, where the wind sliced like blades and frost clung to every timber, there lingered a question so simple, yet so rarely asked. How did pirates survive and sleep in that frozen hell without turning into statues of ice? No warm blankets, no fire. Only the leaking deck of a ship, breath turning to mist, and waves beating against the hull like the heartbeat of death itself. And yet, within those brutal conditions, those wild souls created their own rituals of survival. Small tricks, quiet routines, and even warm dreams born in the heart of darkness and cold. In this video, we'll descend below deck to the swaying rhythm of hammocks, the faint scent of rum, and the whispered secret of how men once slept upon seas of ice, where cold was the enemy and warmth was victory. Hold tight to the railing, for tonight's journey will take you deeper than any storm, to the place where humankind and the cold learned to survive together. And when the last lantern swayed weakly in the salt fog, that question, how did the pirates ever sleep in such a frozen hell, began to unfold the story of the night. It was not merely a tale about sleep, but about human endurance, about the raw yet wondrous instinct to survive amid the endless sea. We begin where the world is coldest, stillest, on the ship's deck where night and wind reign as twin sovereigns. That night, the sea was a sheet of blackened steel, glazed with ice. The wind howled through the ropes, and the masts groaned like bones grinding together in the cold. Every drop of salted mist turned to crystal, clinging to the rails and to the tangled hair of men standing watch. Each breath left their mouths as a pale ghost, dissolving slowly, like a prayer that would never be answered. The deck was slick as glass, sharp as a blade. One touch of metal could cling to skin, burning it raw like fire. But no one stopped, for aboard that ship the cold was not mere weather. It was a living creature, a silent enemy. No words were spoken. The wind was their only voice. Every man on watch knew that a single sleepy nod could mean death, a slip from the deck into the freezing dark, vanishing without a trace. On the water, chunks of ice cracked and collided against the hull, counting time with merciless precision. In that space, every sense was sharpened to pain. Even the silence had its own sound, the sound of exhaustion trapped between life and death. This was no romantic world of Caribbean pirates, no golden sunlight, no raucous laughter over buried treasure. This was the frozen north, where the sea was not blue but silver grey, and the only treasure sought was a night of sleep without freezing to death. That harsh truth made all tales of heroism feel small. Here, there was no room for romance, only flesh, bone, and the stubborn will to live. On deck, a lantern swung gently, casting fragile rings of gold across the frost-covered planks. Its light was so frail that a single breath might have snuffed it out, and yet it stood as a symbol of fragile pride, the thing that kept men from kneeling before nature's cruelty. Beneath soaked leather coats, they curled into themselves, trembling, yet their eyes stayed open, fixed on that small light, clinging to it as if it were the last fragment of life itself. Pirate sailors never believed in peace. Each night was an invisible battle, not with navies, not with death, but with the cold and the fear within their own hearts. They knew too well. Cold does not only steal warmth, it steals reason. Once the mind begins to drift, the body stops resisting, and in an instant, one falls into an eternal sleep. Thus, on deck, sleep itself was a luxury, a reward only the strongest dared to dream of. Our narrator, a nameless witness in the night, leaned against the railing, staring into the misty sea. The wind slid through his clothes, down his neck, through every hollow between his ribs. Each breath was a blade, yet in that stinging pain, there was something pure, the feeling of being alive, of standing against nature with nothing but his own body. He murmured, as if speaking to the sea, "Out here, the greatest enemy is not the navy, nor death itself, but the cold." His words vanished into the wind, mingling with the sound of the waves, a declaration of war that needed no witness. Far ahead, the shadow of another watchman appeared, hunched back, spear in hand, eyes locked on the darkness before the bow. No one knew what he was thinking, perhaps of a hearth at home or a face once loved. But every memory was sliced apart by the wind, leaving only breath, white and fleeting like mist. Aboard that lonely ship drifting through the frozen sea, each man was his own island, cold, distant, and silent. Then the wind rose stronger, awakening the dry sails. Canvas tore, wood groaned, ropes shrieked in agony. The ship shuddered like a bound creature struggling against chains of ice. Below deck, those who had managed to close their eyes jolted awake. No one truly slept. They merely shut their eyes to forget reality for a while. For here, sleep meant a slow death. If one listened closely, they would know the night sea was never silent. It breathed, it moaned, it sang, in a music that only the desperate could hear. The crash of water, the hiss of wind through the masts, the throb of hearts within the chests of the living, all merged into a wordless dirge. And within that song, men learned one truth: no one is stronger than nature, yet a man may still endure, even if only to live one more night. A few gathered small flames from oil lamps, shielding them with damp cloth. The faint warmth rose, painting worn faces with trembling light, eyes hollow yet deep. They chuckled dryly, muttered a few aimless words to stay awake, and fell silent again. In that silence, one could hear skin shivering, teeth chattering, hearts still beating, though the blood within them had begun to cool. The night stretched on. The sky was no longer sky, but a vast black curtain devouring every glimmer of light. In that place, with no boundary between sea and air, time itself seemed to vanish. Only existence remained, bare, relentless, and aching. A sailor bowed his head, quietly wiping frost from his blade. It was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of survival, of the mute discipline that kept a man human amid the cruelty of nature. And then, amid wind and darkness, something wondrous happened. The moon rose, glinting upon the sea like a streak of frozen silver. For a moment, every man looked up. The sight was both beautiful and merciless, like the smile of a sea god toward those who still lived. No one spoke, but in each of their hearts something faintly burned, the belief that dawn would come, and they would have one more day to fight. That was the first night of the story, the cold night on deck, a night where every gust was a trial, every breath a vow to survive. In that place, they did not sleep, nor dream, nor pray. They simply stood, trembling, enduring each minute, like masts of flesh and bone defying the fury of the sea. And before the dawn could break, they already knew. The next night would be the same, but as long as one man still stood, the invisible flame of humankind would go on burning. When the first night finally passed, the ship's deck was coated in a thin layer of ice, like the morning veil of the sea itself. The faint light of dawn only deepened the chill, unable to drive away the breath of death that still lingered from the dark hours before. The last sailors of the night watched quietly changed shifts, eyes sunken, lips cracked, hands trembling so badly they could no longer tell the difference between wood and steel. They said nothing. They simply looked at one another, as if silently admitting the truth. The cold had not slept last night, and it never would. The cold at sea was unlike any cold on land. It did not come and go, did not belong to a season. It was a living thing, unseen yet ever present, eating, breathing, and moving with men. It hid in the seams of the ship, inside the soaked wood and salt. Even when the sun rose, its light brought no warmth, only the cruel clarity to see what the cold had already taken. Pale skin, heavy breath, and the slow fading of human will. Medieval pirate ships were never built for warmth. The planks were damp, warped by wind and storm, soaked through with salt water. Every crack was a blade. Every whistle of wind through the boards sounded like a lost soul's sigh. Tattered canvas sheets hung on the walls, not to shield from sunlight, but to block the wind, to trap whatever human warmth still lingered in the narrow hull. But it was useless. The wind found its way through everything, even into dreams. The cold needed no weapon. It did not strike. Swiftly, it waited. It was more patient than time itself, more enduring than hunger. When night fell, it slipped into bones, crawled through veins, and one by one, quietly broke men down. One sailor once told that he awoke one night unable to feel his arm, not because it was gone, but because his flesh had frozen numb, no longer belonging to him. It was a kind of pain so sharp it erased the line between life and death. They called the cold the uninvited companion. It was always there, travelling with every voyage, haunting every breath. By day it hid beneath the pale sun, and by night it came alive in the wind and the mist. Men began to speak of it as if it were a being. It's moving around the ship. It's standing behind you. Half jokes, half prayers, and sometimes in their short, shallow sleep, they dreamed of the cold sitting beside them, touching their necks, smiling faintly. No one ever truly slept. Each night was a battle without swords, without blood, only the sound of quick breaths and teeth chattering like chains. Amid the gusts, men learned to curl together, to lean into one another. They shared torn blankets, shared warmth, shared fear. In that darkness, humanity drew close, not out of friendship, but out of instinct to survive. There were strange moments when all fell silent, and only the waves spoke, steady, rhythmic, like the breathing of the sea, like the lullaby of the cold itself. And then, in that suffocating stillness, one could feel it. The cold had a soul. It did not kill instantly. It tested, asking whether they had the courage to keep living. Some answered with eternal silence. Others, with eyes open wide into the dark, whispered back as if to say, "I'm still here." Beneath the deck's thin crust of ice, the smell of dampness began to seep down into the hold. Blankets, clothes, all were soaked through, stiff as wood. No one could remember the last time they felt warm. A sailor once said, "The cold doesn't just steal your heat, it steals your memory. You forget the feeling of your skin under warmth. You forget the smell of fire." It sounded poetic, but on that ship, it was simply the truth. When night returned, the cold came stronger. It crept through hammocks, clung to hair, slid into sleeves, and hid beneath fingernails. Their breath turned to fog so thick they had to wipe it away to see each other's faces. But still, no one complained. Complaining wasted strength and changed nothing. Here, silence was the only language the cold respected. On deck, the planks had begun to crack. Drops of water seeped through and fell onto the hammocks below. Slow, steady, like beads of blood dripping in rhythm. Some counted them, just to stay sane. Others used the rhythm to lull themselves to sleep, though they knew sleep might be the most dangerous thing of all. In that world, men were no longer masters of the sea. They were small creatures defying an invisible god named the cold. It had no face, yet wielded power. It made the strongest man tremble, the bravest kneel, and the most terrifying truth of all, it never slept. Sometimes, a man would wake in the middle of the night, half dreaming, half awake, watching his breath turn to smoke before his eyes. He would reach out to touch it and feel frost cling to his skin, burning cold. In that moment he understood. Even the air here was an enemy. The cold had its own voice. It spoke through the whistle of wind across the deck, through the brittle crack of ice on rope. Each time the ship leaned, the frozen rigging broke apart with a dry snap. It was the saddest song, repeating endlessly through the night, a melody of loneliness, fear, and the terrible beauty of cruelty itself. The sailors learned to stare straight into it, into the cold, without despair. They laughed bitterly, saying, "If you can't beat it, make it your friend." But their eyes betrayed them. There was no friendship there, only the bond between prisoner and warden, between prey and predator. They knew, one mistake, one careless night, and the cold would take them, gently, like plucking a leaf from the air. At times of utter exhaustion, men began to imagine things. They watched, their breath drift, and thought it was their soul leaving, their body, that each exhale was a fragment of themselves joining the sea. Perhaps that was why sailors always said, "Every wind is the breath of the dead." In some way, the cold was the keeper of those souls. It made men smaller, humbler, and painfully aware of their own fragility. Then dawn came again, pale, thin, like watered milk. But no one rejoiced, for light brought no warmth. It only revealed more clearly what they faced. On deck, ice melted and froze again. Water dripped, then turned solid. Life aboard the ship became a circle of cold, day no different from night, and night no different from hell. When a young sailor collapsed, his lips blue. The others simply pulled a cloth over him and whispered, "He's sleeping." No one said dead, for to them, death was merely a sleep without cold. The cold never slept, but it taught men how to dream. Not gentle dreams, but illusions of warmth, a fire, an embrace, a wooden cabin on land. These visions were the final threads that kept them awake, holding on to life. For if they ever forgot, if they ever let the cold lull them to rest, they would never wake again. And so, as night fell once more, the lanterns were lit again, trembling in the wind. The waves struck the hull, the wind moaned through the seams. Everything returned to its eternal rhythm. For on this sea, no dawn was ever strong enough to banish the dark, only silent souls enduring one more night, one more breath in the endless kingdom of the cold that never sleeps. And then, as the night upon the deck thickened, as the sea wind ceased to sting like whips upon the skin and turned instead into the steady breath of some slumbering giant, the weary pirates began to retreat. They left the deck, where the cold reigned like a merciless king, and descended into another world, a hidden one below, where darkness was not merely concealment, but warmth. There, within the belly of the old wooden ship, the warmth of darkness became a rare luxury, and the last remaining comfort they had. Below deck, there was no moonlight, no wind, and no clear boundary between waking and dream. Everything melted together into a heavy, thick air, salty, damp, and alive. Human breath, salt, rum, and the rot of old timber intertwined into one dense mixture, swirling like smoke. And yet, for those who lived between the waves, that scent meant peace, the smell that told them they were still alive, still wrapped within the wooden ribs of their only home, the ship. Oil lamps flickered weakly, spilling a faint golden glow across faces darkened by salt and storm. The light was too fragile to reveal much, just enough to create the illusion that the surrounding shadows were shrinking, as though even the darkness sought human warmth to cling to. Hammocks swayed gently, strung between masts and barrels. The ropes creaked in rhythm with the waves striking the hull, forming a strange symphony, half lullaby, half threat. In that space, sleep did not come easily, but when it did, it felt like a gift, rare and sacred. A sailor turned in his hammock, pulling a coarse blanket, thick as a sack, over his head. He did not fear the dark. Darkness was a friend. What he feared was the cold, the silence that pressed against his ribs when he lay awake, hearing only the ship's slow, aching groans. So they learned to seek warmth in one another. 2, 3 men lying close, sharing what little heat remained, or simply passing around a bottle of rum, that burning liquid which scorched the throat yet melted the ice within their chests. Here, warmth came not from fire, but from presence, from the closeness of another human being. A hand resting on a shoulder, a sigh nearby, even the faint snore of a friend was enough to remind them they were not alone. Beneath the deck, the pirates, men the world called bloodthirsty and cruel, became most human. No swords, no shouting, no curses. Only fragile souls seeking rest amid the darkness, within the cold heart of the sea. If anyone woke in the middle of the night, they would see a strange sight. Dozens of bodies gently rocking in their hammocks, like cocoons suspended in shadow. These men, who lived by fear and blood, were now being lulled to sleep by the ship itself, their vast wooden mother. The wind that once howled outside had softened into a faraway lullaby, and each crashing wave became a heartbeat, reminding them that the ocean was still there. But, for now had chosen to spare them. Darkness, once a terror, became a refuge. It embraced them, shielding them from the cold, from loneliness, and from themselves. In the world above, they were hunted. Outcasts rejected by law, by faith, by the very order of men. But below deck, among worn planks and trembling lamplight, they were allowed to be human again, to be weak, to tremble, to dream. Perhaps that was why so many pirates, even after setting foot on land, could never truly leave the sea. They would say, the sea never sleeps. But perhaps the truth was this: the sea was their blanket. Vast, cold, but forgiving. Violent, yet loyal. Every ship was a cradle, rocking them between life and death, between waking and dream. And below deck, in the realm of shadows, they found a kind of peace the land could never offer. Acceptance. In those rare moments, when the wind grew still and laughter faded, each man drifted into his own dream. Some dreamed of the harbour, some of the lovers they'd left behind, and some dreamed only of the endless sea. Boundless, silent, eternal. But whatever their dream, it was always wrapped in the same blanket: darkness and the faint warmth of the forsaken. Strange, isn't it, that in a world soaked with blood and sin, such peace could exist? No guns, no greed, no cruelty, only men, bare and small, leaning against each other, keeping the cold at bay. They shared not just warmth, but life itself. And in that moment, when all lamps were extinguished, when the ship was swallowed by night and the sound of waves turned to a lullaby, one could finally understand some warmth needs no fire. It flows from the human heart, from that last spark of kindness still alive amid a frozen sea. Beneath the deck, where darkness breathed warmth, the pirates, those whom the world once named demons, became lost children once more, simply trying to find a quiet sleep within the long, trembling dream called life. Yet that sleep, no matter how deep, was never whole. For out there, the sea never sleeps. Every wave, every breath of wind is a reminder that the world does not pause simply because man grows weary. And while half the ship lies buried in darkness, surrendering itself to the fragile warmth of slumber, the other half must remain awake, listening, watching, feeling the heartbeat of the sea, that ancient rhythm that has never stopped, that never shows mercy. Up on deck, the faint oil lamps flicker against the faces of the night watch. They stand there, silent, solitary, like wooden effigies carved by the sea itself, shaped by salt and wind. Each step upon the planks creaks softly, echoing through the emptiness like a whisper from the deep. They are not allowed a moment's distraction. One shift of the wind, one rebellious wave, and the ship could heel without warning, spilling everything into the black abyss below. A watch, 2 hours, 3 hours, sometimes an entire sleepless night. For pirates, it is not merely duty, but a ritual of survival. The sea teaches them, he who sleeps dies, so they learn to listen, to the waves, to the wind, to the faint cracking of the wood as the ship groans beneath unseen pressure. To others, these sounds would be chaos. To them, it is the sea's language, the pulse of their vast and dangerous companion. Every watch is a trial. The wind lashes at their faces, salt freezes upon their brows, and the cold slices through skin like razors. Some nights, the ocean lies so still that the watchman might think himself adrift in a dream, until a small sound pierces the quiet, a warning whispered by fate, a loose sail, a shifting plank, or far away, a strange light trembling on the horizon. Each could be the beginning of chaos. In the drifter's world, time is not measured by clocks, but by the sea's breathing. They change watch when the wind turns, eat when the moon rises, sleep when the stars fade. Their entire lives revolve around that invisible giant's breath, a creature capable of rage, of forgiveness, of endless trial. The sea is both mother and tormentor, and deep within, every pirate knows. Stepping onto the deck at night is stepping onto the edge between life and death. Old sailors say the night watch is when a man's truest self emerges. For in the darkness, there is no audience, no legend, only a body standing against the vastness of the sea. With each gust that passes, they hear echoes of their own past, curses, laughter weeping swallowed long ago by the tide. The sea remembers, and in the quiet hours of watch, it retells every sin ever cast upon it. Those who keep watch speak little. They do not need words. The sea speaks for them. Sometimes one will hum an old tune, hoarse and heavy, drifting across the night. The song is not meant for others to hear, but simply to remind himself that he is still alive. These men, who once stole, killed, and cursed the world, now stand still between heaven and water, feeling themselves so small they almost dissolve. And in that moment, they understand why the sea is called eternal, because it exists beyond guilt, Beyond fear, beyond repentance. At times, in the blur between waking and sleep, they see mirages, a faint gleam on the horizon, like a faraway lighthouse that does not exist. Some say it is the souls of the drowned, returned to guard their kind. Others call it the breath of the sea, a fragile shimmer symbolizing life amid the endless dark. But no one speaks of it aloud, for here, faith dissolves as easily as mist. The watch does not end with a bell, but with a sigh. The new guard climbs up, the old one descends. They exchange a silent glance, no greeting, no gratitude, just the quiet knowledge that they are keeping the same endless rhythm. The sea never sleeps, and so neither may they. If below deck, darkness carries warmth, then on deck, darkness takes the form of trial. It demands wakefulness, endurance, and the stubborn flame of will against the cold. Perhaps that is why the night watch is the ship's true heart. The place where all motion, all life, all belief begins and ends. Sometimes, when the sky clears, a field of stars opens wide, so bright it steals the breath away. The watchman tilts his head back, letting their pale light fall upon his face. In that instant, suspended in the vastness, he feels as though he is looking into the eyes of the sea. Cold, deep, yet somehow forgiving. He remembers the land, the firelit nights of warmth, and he smiles faintly. For here, among the wind and the waves, he has found another kind of peace. Not the peace of safety, but of acceptance, the knowledge that he belongs to the sea. And so, night after night, watch after watch, the ship drifts onward like a living creature. The sea's breath mingles with human breath, and though no one says it aloud, they all know. As they guard the sea guards them in return. For if the day ever comes when they cease to listen, when they no longer feel fear or awe, that will be the day the ocean claims them, pulling them down into its cold spiral, where there are no more breaths, no more watches, and no one left to remember they ever lived. And then, as the shift bell faded into the fog, and the silhouettes of the night watch descended from the deck, leaving the sky once more to silence and wind, the ship sank back into its slow, familiar rhythm of exhaustion. The cold wind remained, slipping through every crack in the planks, through every unfinished dream. Amid the suffocating air of salt and human breath, there was only one thing that still made them feel warm. Not fire, but rum. On pirate ships, rum was more than a drink. It was the last flame of the soul. When night wrapped everything in darkness, and the cold cut through flesh like 1,000 tiny blades, men turned to it as a way to forget. 1 sip, 2 sips, then half a bottle. The liquor slid down their throats, burning yet sweet. A gentle lie. For a fleeting moment their blood seemed to stir, their breath lightened, and the world around them grew a little less cruel. People often said, rum is a friend, but also a traitor. It gave them the illusion of life, then stole away clarity and caution, the two most vital things at sea. But who could blame them when they faced frost by day and fear by night? The cold could kill the body, but loneliness was what killed the soul. And so, amid fog and wind, a cup of rum became a shared ritual, the nameless religion of those forgotten upon the ocean. Imagine such a night. Below deck, the oil lamps cast their dim glow upon hollow faces, bearded, unkempt, eyes red from sleeplessness. Hoarse laughter rose between the clinking of cups, the creak of hammocks, and the howling wind outside. One told an old tale, another hummed a song of the homeland, and together they drifted through the haze of drink, wind-banished souls afloat in intoxication. For a brief instant, the ship itself seemed warm, but only for a while, only for a heartbeat. To them, rum was memory, the scent of land, of campfire nights, of another's warmth. As the alcohol coursed through their veins, it tore them from their frozen present and hurled them into another world, one where the sea was calm, the wind gentle, and they were no longer sinners. An illusion, yes, but the only one they could afford to buy. Sometimes, amid their drunken haze, someone would burst into tears. No one laughed, no one mocked. They all understood that those tears were not just born of fear, but of the longing to touch something real. Some mumbled prayers, to God, to the sea, or perhaps to themselves, begging to live, to see another dawn. In that cramped space, those murmurs mingled with the sound of the waves, forming a sound both sorrowful and sacred. a warped hymn for souls beyond salvation. Pirates, no matter how ruthless, were still human. And what man, when cornered by despair, does not seek something to deceive himself with? Rum was not merely liquor, it was liquid faith, a belief that they still held command over their own bodies, that they could still feel warmth, even if only imagined. In the darkness, the passing of the cup was like a torch. Not enough to drive away the cold, but enough to keep them from falling apart. Some died in their drunkenness, collapsing on deck, letting the cold claim their final breath. Yet no one wept, no one cursed. For here, dying in rum's embrace was kinder than dying in clarity. What use was sobriety when all that lay ahead was endless darkness and the roaring of waves like the voice of demons? At times, even the captain would drink, but not to lose himself. He drank to remember the fallen, the ships swallowed by waves, the treasures never found. For him, rum was not escape but confrontation, a way to face the ghosts of memory. Each sip a farewell, a promise to the sea. I'm still here. I have not surrendered. But rum, like the sea, was merciless. When the drunkenness passed, it left a void colder than before. Sweat clung to skin, minds dulled, throats burned with thirst. They realized that the warmth they felt was nothing but the body's cruel trick. For as blood rushed to the surface, their hearts weakened, and they grew colder than ever. Rum could not banish the cold. It only made men forget they were freezing. When dawn's pale light crept in, the deck still smelled of liquor and salt. Empty cups rolled about. Drunken bodies lay tangled among the ropes. Some still clutched empty bottles as if they were sacred relics. Beside them, another whispered. Whether a song or a prayer, no one could tell. Lips purple, breath shallow. In that icy morning, the scene was hauntingly beautiful. Those nightly binges were more than indulgence. They were a fragile bridge between man and instinct. In a place where life could be stolen at any moment, they did not drink to forget, but to remember that they had once existed. Within the haze of alcohol, they found a fleeting ember of warmth. False, yet enough to keep them from turning to stone amid the endless frost. Rum, in the end, was the emblem of the pirate's fate. Wild, brief, and full of contradiction. It both saved and destroyed. It gave laughter, then drained life. Yet without it, the ship would be colder, and men would die faster. Not because their bodies failed, but because their souls had already frozen. Every night was the same. When the wind rose, when the watch ended, and when fear began to creep in, they turned once more to that dark amber liquid. They poured, they drank, and they smiled. The smile of men who knew they were being deceived, but accepted it nonetheless. For upon the boundless sea, sometimes illusion was the only thing that let a man believe in tomorrow. And so the ship drifted on, slow, silent, carrying dozens of drunken souls and nameless prayers. Across the silver waves, their inebriated songs mingled with the wind, a lullaby from hell, gentle and fierce, alive and dead all at once. Yet amid all that chaos, one truth remained. The cold never truly won. For though the warmth of rum was but an illusion, it was warmth nonetheless, and so long as men still sought it, the sea had not yet swallowed them whole. Would you like me to adapt this translation slightly for spoken narration, so it flows like a bedtime storyteller's voice with pauses and rhythm? Or keep it as it is, a literary prose translation faithful to the written form? When the taste of rum slowly faded from their breath and the hoarse laughter died away in the dim belly of the ship, only one thing remained alive: dreams. Outside, the wind still howled, the sea still sang its cold, unending song. But in the minds of the drunken men, another door opened, the door into the world of sleep, where even the ocean itself knew how to dream. Perhaps only those who have lived at sea for months on end, far from the touch of land, could understand that the dreams aboard a ship are unlike any other. They are not as gentle as the dreams of one lying on grass, nor as peaceful as those within a warm home. The sailor's dream is a twilight between life and death, between a reality corroded by salt and the fading memories of human warmth. When the body is worn down by cold, hunger, and drink, it is within the dream that a man rediscovers the warmth the sea has stolen from him. In the damp darkness, dozens of men sleep in hammocks swaying like the cradles of fate. Each time the ship tilts, they drift with the motion, as if the sea itself were rocking them to sleep. And within that rhythm, dreams are born, silent, fragile, yet fiercer than any storm. Some dream of land, green meadows, the smoke of evening fires, the laughter of a wife whose face they can no longer recall. Some dream of fire, that which they have not seen for months, that which, on a ship, could burn the whole world with a single spark. And some dream of a calm sea, waters still, the sky so blue it terrifies. But that is a bad omen, for sailors say that when the sea lies quiet in a dream, a storm is already rising in the waking world. The sea's dreams, strangely enough, are never pure. They are always a mixture of illusion and fear, for when a man lives too long among waves and salt, his mind begins to merge with the ocean, vast, borderless, unmoored. In dreams, they hear strange sounds, the ropes creaking like sobs, the sails sighing softly, the crack of wood beating like the ship's own heart. And so, reality and dream dissolve into one another, as waves dissolve into mist. There are nights when a man screams in his sleep, thrashing as though being dragged beneath the waves. He will tell later of cold hands reaching up from below, of the ghostly eyes of dead crewmates, of his own body floating pale among the fog. Yet when he wakes, there is only sweat and darkness. Perhaps the sea does not kill them with frost, but with the haunting that seeps into their dreams. And yet, amid all those nightmares, there are still dreams of beauty. Some dream of walking upon sand, hearing the gentle lap of waves, feeling the sun's warmth on their skin. Such dreams are short, no longer than a breath, but enough to make a man live another day. For in the world of pirates, a peaceful dream is rarer than gold. The old storyteller aboard once said, "We all dream because the sea must dream too." And indeed, it seems as though the ocean seeps into men's dreams, like a living creature that breathes, that sees, that teaches them both fear and tenderness. The sea is cruel, but in dreams it becomes a gentle mother, lulling them into the brief warmth of their own humanity. As the night deepens, the steady breaths of sleeping men blend with the creak of timber and the sound of the waves. None of them knows whether they are dreaming or awake. Time in that place ceases to exist. Only souls drift between two shores, one of flesh and one of memory. That sleep is not rest, but another form of survival, the mind's way of saving itself from decay. Sometimes, one wakes in the middle of the night, blinking through the gloom, seeing his crewmates still asleep. The dim oil light flickers upon their faces, faces hardened by cold, yet lips softly moving, whispering to someone unseen. And in that moment, the watcher understands. Out there, amid endless wind and water, dreams are the last warmth of humankind. Dreams have their own scent, of salt, of damp wood, of human skin, a strange mixture only the sea could create. They are not pleasant, but they are hauntingly familiar. Those dreams pull men back to the most primitive parts of themselves, the part that fears, that loves, that remembers. Sometimes, in their dreams, they glimpse a shadow, a mother, a lover, a child. And when they wake, no one dares to speak of it, for to speak is to make it vanish. Pirates, those branded as ruthless, thieving, heartless. Yet in the long night, when the rum runs dry and the sea still roars, they too dream tender dreams. Perhaps that is what keeps them human, for if the sea has taken everything from them, honor, homeland, warmth, then dreams are the one thing they can still keep hidden within. In every dream, the sea ceases to be an enemy. It becomes a mirror reflecting their souls, deep, dark, and beautiful. It shows them fear and then offers them hope. It drowns them in cold, then lifts them again with a warm image of memory. The sea, in that way, is their truest companion, only too real, too vast, too merciless to be called by name. When dawn comes, dreams dissolve like mist. The first light filters through the cracks in the wood, falls upon the damp deck, and wakes them one by one. They open their eyes, squint against the brightness, and sit in silence. There is an emptiness, yet a kind of peace, as though they have just returned from another world. Then, wordlessly, they begin their day anew, facing the true sea, the true cold, the true life. Yet deep in their eyes, something lingers, a faint glimmer, weak but unmistakable. What men call hope. They may not remember their dreams, but the very fact of having dreamt reminds them they are still human. still capable of feeling, still able to believe. And so, the ship drifts on, swaying between two rhythms, the rhythm of the sea and the rhythm of dreams. For in the end, the sea's dreams do not dwell in water or wind, but in the hearts of those who float upon it. They dream on the sea's behalf, dream of warmth, of land, of something the ocean has never known, kindness. And so long as men can still dream, the sea itself continues to breathe. And then, while the breath of the sea still lingered in dreams, not yet faded, a thin blade of light began to slit open the night. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the sun rose quietly, not brilliant, not glorious, but pale and frail, as if it too had barely survived the long dark. Morning on a pirate ship was never a beginning. It was merely a temporary reward for those who had not been swallowed by the sea. There were no roosters crowing, no scent of coffee, no songs to welcome the dawn, only the sound of ropes tightening in the wind, of timber groaning under damp salt, and of eyes opening to a world still cold to the bone. The chill of the night never vanished. It only retreated a little, as though making space for fatigue, for hunger, and for the thick silence that clung to the deck. One by one, they woke, not because they had rested enough, but because the sea allowed no one to sleep forever. Dreams had just slipped away from them, yet their remnants still lingered in their eyes. Some still murmured, lips moving faintly as though whispering to a figure from the dream. Others stared out toward the horizon, where the sun and sea merged into a hazy line, and for a moment, no one knew whether they were seeing reality or searching for a dream that had not yet ended. A thin mist coated everything on deck, sea fog mixed with salt and human breath. Each step left a damp mark, and those footsteps, blending with the rhythm of waves, sounded like the faint heartbeat of the ship itself. They moved slowly, like souls returned from another realm. Their hands gripped the ropes, their shoulders ached, but deep inside, each of them felt one simple truth. They had survived another night, and that, upon the sea, was the greatest victory. Perhaps only those who have lived upon the water could understand that each morning is a small rebirth. No one knows whether they will see the next sunrise. The sea may be gentle today, yet tomorrow it may rage, devouring the ship without a reason. And so, when dawn arrives, even as a weak sliver of light, it makes hearts tremble, not because it is beautiful, but because it proves that life still endures. They began their work as always. One checked the sails, another scrubbed the deck, another patched a leaking barrel. The clatter of tools, the quiet voices, the sniffling from the cold, all blended into the symphony of survival. There were no complaints, no joy either. Aboard a pirate ship, silence was the common tongue, and only work could drown the fear that death might be waiting just beyond the horizon. Now and then, someone glanced eastward where the light spread wider. In that instant, they saw the sea glimmer like molten silver, so beautiful it felt unreal. Yet that beauty carried with it a strange sorrow, for they knew this light was not meant to comfort, but to remind them that the world went on, even if they were only dust drifting upon its surface. Some of the younger men, not yet hardened by the sea, still looked up at the sky as if searching for a sign of fortune. But the older ones, with hair tangled by salt and hands hardened by rope, merely smiled faintly. They knew the truth. The sea blesses no one, and it punishes no one. The sea simply exists, and in that existence, men must learn how to survive. The morning of survivors had its own scent, the dampness of wood, the brine of salt, the stale trace of last night's rum, and the raw human smell of bodies alive. The air was so thick that with every breath, one could taste the flavor of endurance. Someone retched softly over the side. Another sat silently with a piece of hard bread gone soggy from the mist. They ate in silence, as if performing a ritual, for every bite was proof that they were still alive. Then, as the sun climbed higher, the mist began to fade. Drops of water clung to the ropes and fell, glimmering like tiny crystals. The sight, though simple, drew tight something in their chests. Amid the sea's cruelty, such fragile moments were the only thread that still bound them to the human world. A gust of wind blew through, tossing their hair and carrying away a layer of exhaustion. And in that fleeting moment, they felt a kind of peace, fragile, but more precious than any treasure. The old storyteller, who had weathered 100 storms, leaned against the rail, gazing far into the distance. He spoke softly, as if to himself. The sea never wishes to kill. It only wants to see who is strong enough to go on. His words drifted with the wind, gentle, yet sinking deep into every heart. For aboard this ship, survival was not luck, it was instinct. The morning went on, and work resumed. The clash of wood, the strain of rope, the shouts of command, all those sounds formed a kind of symphony of life. Each sound was a heartbeat, each breath a challenge thrown back at the sea. They had lived through the night, and they would live another day, not for distant hopes, but because living was the only rebellion they had. When the sunlight finally struck their faces, it revealed every scar, every line, every bloodshot eye worn thin from sleepless nights. Yet within that light something shimmered, not sweat, but will, a glow the sea could never drown. Though their bodies were battered and their souls scraped raw, they stood there still, amid wind and water, a testament that even the smallest of men could defy the infinite. As the ship cut through the waves once more, they returned to their work. No one spoke of death, nor of the night just past, but within each of them, the same thought echoed. We are still here, and that alone was enough, to live, to believe that each morning was a kind of miracle. For upon the sea, there is no heaven and no hell. There is only the sea, and those who survive it. And every dawn, no matter how cold, remains proof that amid this merciless ocean, mankind still breathes, still exists, still dreams. When the pale morning light faded over the silver-grey sea, and the survivors finished their harsh breakfast, the ship began to change once more. Gone was the gentle rhythm of sleepers and their fragile dreams. In its place came the cruel presence of nature, vast and merciless, a force that neither knew nor forgave humankind. Ice had begun to form, coating the masts, the ropes, and the weathered planks that had endured the passage of time. It was more than cold. It was the song of death itself, echoing through the trembling wood, the slicing wind, and the quivering hearts of those who still lived aboard. On deck, both the seasoned sailors and the young ones meeting the sea's cruelty for the first time faced an undeniable truth. Ice was the power of nature, and they were nothing more than drifting specks upon it. They climbed the frozen masts, knives in hand, steadying themselves with ropes as they hacked away the heavy crusts of frost clinging to sails and rigging. Each strike rang out, slicing the wind, a sound that seemed to come from the ocean's own throat. Beautiful, fierce, and terrifying enough to still a man's step. The whole ship became a mournful symphony. The crack of blades on ice, the tightening of ropes, the drip of water from the boards, the shriek of wind through every crevice. To an outsider, it might have seemed chaotic, but to the sailors, it was a language of survival, the conversation between life and death, a rhythm they had to listen to if they wished to endure. Ice was not merely cold, it was a warning. One careless move, one misplaced step, and you would vanish into the grasp of the abyss. Yet amidst the hardship, there was a haunting beauty. The masts glittered under the dim light, and the ropes, stiff with frost, shone like threads of silver. When the wind swept through, the layers of ice struck against each other, producing a chilling, mesmerizing chime. The Song of Ice, they called it. It was nature's hymn, a reminder of its power and of life's fragility. In that sound, every sailor paused, breathed deeply, and understood that they were only guests in a vast and indifferent universe. Some stood silently on the deck, gazing toward the glimmering sea, fear crawling quietly beneath their ribs. Not fear of men, nor of storms, but of nature itself, cold, voiceless, infinite. They had once believed that rum, dreams, or the touch of a comrade's hand could protect them, but the ice and its song whispered the truth. All things are fleeting. A single lapse, a single breath too slow, and the sea would claim it all. Below deck, the men who had stood the night watch stirred late, sweat still clinging to their brows as the wind howled through the cracks. The smell of salt, damp wood, and frost filled the air, heavy and stifling. Every movement required care. Every sound seemed to awaken fear. They learned to move gently, to observe, to read nature's rhythm as if it were scripture. For the ice spared no one, yet it taught patience, awareness, and reverence for the force that ruled their fate. The ice-coated planks and iron-stiff ropes were more than physical threats. They were symbols of the sea's untouchable dominion. One violent gust could undo hours of labor, leaving the sailors fighting desperately to preserve what little control they had. Yet within that danger, something profound took shape. A strange bond between men. They met each other's eyes, clasped hands, worked in perfect unison to defend the ship against the creeping weight of ice. It was another kind of music, the music of survival, born of fear and endurance, composed by hearts that refused to yield. Even their dreams were haunted by the ice's voice. The sailors swore they could hear whispers within it, prayers or curses, indistinguishable from one another, blending into a murmur that blurred the line between the living and the dead. And in that spectral chorus, they recognized their own smallness. Death did not come only to the weak, but to those who forgot to respect the sea, those who mistook its silence for mercy. Still, amidst the cruelty, miracles persisted. Ice, though numbing and merciless, could also craft moments of fragile beauty. Crystals formed on the ropes like tiny jewels, glinting faintly in the dim light. When the wind passed through, they chimed with a pure, delicate sound. In that terror, those moments became a kind of warmth, a reminder that even in death's shadow, beauty endured, and life still pulsed in every rhythm of the sea. The pirates, hardened men who had faced countless tempests, trembled before the ice, not from weakness, but because they understood. Ice was the embodiment of time and death, boundless and impartial. They struck at it, mended ropes, fought to keep the sails from tearing. Yet deep inside, they knew it was all temporary. Another storm, another night of greater cold, and the battle would begin anew. And yet, it was precisely these struggles that forged their strength. When the first sunlight broke through and the ice began to melt, when the masts and rigging slowly returned to their shape, the sailors felt life stir within them once more. They had survived. They had wrestled, even briefly, with the elements themselves, and in their hearts arose a quiet, wordless gratitude. Gratitude for witnessing both the sea's brutality and its grace. Gratitude simply for still breathing the frozen air of the living. The night of ice, the song of death, and the dawn of survival. Together they formed a rhythm unlike any other. Fear intertwined with beauty, peril with resilience. Every footstep, every swing of a blade, every shared glance between shipmates became proof of humanity's defiance against the infinite. And as the ship drifted onward, the ice remained, the song remained, and the survivors walked the deck knowing that their battle with nature was far from over. Yet because of the ice, because of that cold, haunting melody, they also understood something profound. They were still alive, still feeling, still capable of fighting. And within that struggle, amid the harshest of trials, life and beauty endured, weaving an endless symphony that only those brave enough to stand upon the deck could ever truly hear. When the morning light slipped through the thawing layers of ice upon the ship's deck, and the breath of those who survived mingled with the rhythm of the waves, the vessel ceased to be a mere machine drifting across the sea. It had become a miniature world of its own, where every creature, every breath, every dream had to pay a price to exist. But beyond the frost and the storms, there lurked another enemy, silent, unseen, and no less deadly: disease. Not the wind, not the waves, but sickness itself crept through every crevice, waiting to claim the lives of those daring enough to live upon the endless sea. Below deck, where sunlight could barely reach, the air hung thick with dampness, a mix of mold, sweat, salt, and the scent of bodies slowly failing. The weaker ones, the less fortunate, quickly fell victim to scurvy, fever, coughs, and infections born of spoiled rations. At times the dry, rasping sound of coughing echoed through the darkness, a mournful rhythm that foretold death's quiet approach, and the living had no choice but to accept the silence. A heavy silence, not of fear, but of cruel understanding that the weak would be left behind, and the dead would become lessons for those who remained. The sailors learned to survive not only against nature's brutality, but against their own bodies and the frailty of their community. When sickness spread, the strong bore the burden for all, tending to corpses, scrubbing the decks with vinegar, rationing what little food was left. Each act carried the weight of survival, yet reminded them that life itself was fragile, a fleeting gift that demanded everything in return: time, strength, and sometimes even humanity. Silence aboard the ship was more than order. It was the language of survival. Everyone knew that a complaint, a moment of weakness, a tremor of fear could throw the group into chaos. That silence was both terrifying and necessary. It turned the ship into a temporary world, where death was not an abstract fear, but a constant, tangible presence, lingering by their side. The dead were wrapped in cloth and cast into the sea, not out of cruelty, but because the ocean allowed no delay. The sick, the frail, were removed from the circle of survival, an unwritten law, but absolute in its cruelty. Those who remained would sometimes touch the cold bodies, the stench of death still clinging to the air, yet they did not scream, nor did they weep. They learned to face death with calm, for even a single cough or infected wound could make them the next to go. The price of survival was restraint, learning to live with pain and with loneliness so deep it hollowed the soul. They became quiet, resilient, cold, not from lack of feeling, but because it was the only way to go on. The disease that stalked the ship tested not only their flesh, but their minds. Each time a crewmate weakened, each ragged breath, each body cast into the waves chipped away at their sanity. They were forced to balance emotion and necessity. For survival at sea was a lesson in how cruelty and compassion could coexist. They could not save everyone, yet they still cared, still watched, still remembered every detail, every sign, so that tomorrow they might endure one more day. In the dark of the lower deck, sometimes only a single candle flickered across a furrowed face, but that faint light was enough to reveal exhaustion and resolve. Each new day began with hunger, cold, and the stench of decay, yet also with the chance to survive a little longer. The meals were merciless. Rock-hard biscuits, rancid salted meat, briny water, but they were gifts nonetheless. Cruel reminders that no treasure of gold or silver could match the worth of a single breath still clinging to life. There were moments when the sailors realized that the cost of survival was not only strength or wit, but connection. Fragile bonds of trust and shared endurance. Surrounded by death and disease, the living had to share the burden without collapsing beneath it. They could not afford to be weak, yet they could not strip away their comrades' humanity either, for if they did, the loss would spread beyond one man. It would consume the ship itself. The sound of wind, waves, ragged breathing, and bodies slipping into the deep wove together into a mournful symphony, a requiem of life and death that only the truly brave could hear in full. Those who survived learned to listen to that rhythm, to move with the sea, with one another, to face death without surrender. Each breath, each step, each act was a small victory, a testament to the endurance of the human spirit. The silence aboard was more than a rule, it was a shield against chaos. To speak fear was to lose focus, and the sea forgave no such weakness. It was this silence, cold yet disciplined, that kept those fragile lives afloat against sickness, hunger, frost, and the nearness of death. And in those rare moments, when a few reached out to clasp each other's hands, meeting eyes in weary understanding, they realized that the price of survival was not only in coldness and strength, but in the quiet courage to feel, to empathize, and to keep walking forward across the drifting world of waves. It was a price few could bear, but those who did became living proof of the will to endure, a testament to the resilience and determination of humankind in the face of death itself. In the end, the ship pressed on, cutting through waves with the weight of those who had survived, the ones who had paid in sweat, in tears, in endless silence. They passed through storms, through frost, through sickness, and every moment became a mute triumph, a proof that survival at sea was not only of the body, but of the mind, the heart, and the will. And it is that truth, the price of life itself, that makes their story immortal, echoing still, like the rhythm of waves and the eternal sound of the ship adrift upon the endless ocean. When loneliness and death seemed to seep into every plank, every rope, and every trembling breath of the surviving sailors, a small light suddenly flickered in that heavy air, as if to remind them that life still existed, however fragile it might be. It was not the blinding light of the sun, nor the warm glow of an oil lamp's flame, but a living, breathing creature, soft, small, and quietly alive, a cat. It appeared in silence, each step light upon the deck, weaving between calloused feet, nestling into the coats of weary men, before curling up on a beam to sleep. And somehow, through that small, tender presence, the cold of the ocean and the cruelty of the sea seemed to soften, as though whispering that even in infinity, warmth could still be found. The cat was no miracle, yet to sailors who had endured long nights of storms, plague, and frost, it became a symbol of hope, of life's stubborn will to endure. In its small, glimmering eyes, they saw a simple truth often forgotten, that no matter how dark a place becomes, life always finds a way, curling into itself, holding its warmth, waiting for another dawn. It was strange how such a small creature could bring a comfort greater than any gentle wind or pale ray of sun. It became a quiet flame of spirit, a silent companion urging them to live on, to keep fighting against the merciless heart of the sea. The sight of the cat curled upon the beam, eyes half closed beneath the dim light, reflecting tiny, unyielding sparks of hope, became a lesson in life and resilience. It taught that one need not be mighty or grand to survive. Sometimes it is enough to be small, soft, yet steadfast, to find a warm place and keep breathing. Through its gentle movements, the sailors realized that hope did not lie in gold or treasure, but in simple moments, in warmth, in breath, in the quiet pulse of life around them. Looking deeper into the cat's story, one sees that even the sea, harsh and unforgiving, cannot strip away the small human moments that make life bearable. The cat became a symbol, not only of survival, but of faith and the spirit's ability to heal. During those drifting days upon the frozen ocean, when meaning and value seemed to fade away, that tiny being was enough to remind them it is never too late to rediscover warmth and hope. The sailors, men who had faced death, disease, ice, and endless isolation, began to draw strength from the creature's mere existence. They would gently place a hand on its head, stroke its warm fur, feel its steady breath and small heartbeat. In those moments, fear seemed to fade, replaced by peace. A sense that no matter how violent the sea, something remained unbroken. The human faith in life itself. Those quiet, ordinary seconds became spiritual beacons, guiding them through the trials ahead, teaching them that survival lies not only in the body, but in the soul's ability to find light within darkness. The image of the cat asleep on the beam reflected a profound truth about existence, that in a harsh world, survival does not always demand strength or grandeur, but patience, gentleness, and the wisdom to seek warmth wherever one can. The sailors, watching its calm and instinctive will to live, began to understand that they too could adapt, that they could endure, protect what mattered most: breath, warmth, faith, and hope. The cat was not only a symbol of hope, it became a quiet bridge between the survivors. In silence, they cared for the little creature together, sharing rare, peaceful moments amidst the brutal sea. Small gestures, a touch, a smile, a shared glance, wove an unseen net of connection, keeping them from sinking into isolation. They realized that survival was not only an individual act, but a shared bond, between shipmates and between all living things. The cat became living proof of life's strength and hope's endurance, that even in despair, one could still find comfort, still keep breathing, still feel warmth in the spirit. It reminded them that amid storms, sickness, ice, and death, humanity could still create beauty, small, tranquil moments that kept the soul alive. And it was through these moments that they continued to move forward, to face each new trial, to rediscover the value of every breath, every sleep, every heartbeat aboard that drifting ship when dawn came, spilling its pale light across the damp deck. The glow caught in the cat's eyes, reflecting the very hope the sailors had long sought. It was not grand, nor loud, but the quiet strength it carried was enough to brighten an entire day at sea. It reminded them that no matter how vast the ocean, no matter how fierce the challenge, there would always be small, precious moments anchoring them to life and to themselves. And as the ship sailed onward through mist and restless waves, the cat slept peacefully upon its beam. The sailors watched, feeling warmth return to their hearts, realizing that the greatest treasure was not gold nor conquest, but the fragile warmth of life itself, the hope that threads through frost, the power to keep moving, breathing, and existing amid the boundless sea. Through its simple, quiet presence, the cat had become an immortal symbol of life, hope, and warmth. It reminded them, and reminds us still, that in this vast, cold and ruthless world, one can always find light, hold faith, and keep the heart alive. Amid the storms, the sickness, and the ice, that small spark of life endured, proof that existence always finds a way, and that hope, however fragile, can still light the entire world.